In November of 2001, the gaming world not only was first introduced to a brand new console with the launch of Microsoft's Xbox console, but also a game that would go on to have a huge impact in the video game industry for years to come. That game was Halo Combat Evolved. Pretty much a decade after its launch, Halo was the premier shooter franchise on the market, and is one of the rare games that became part of the mainstream world of entertainment. The same way that Call of Duty has become a household name that even non-gamers have heard of this past decade, Halo was very much perceived the same way throughout the 2000s. It's been almost 20 years since Halo Combat Evolved launched, and the Halo series is definitely in an odd spot at the moment. Halo Infinite just got delayed from the Xbox Series X launch, and the franchise hasn't really nailed some of their most recent entries in the series. Some of the recent Halo talk as of late, I wanted to go back and finally experience the campaign of Halo Combat Evolved for pretty much the first time. Besides from Halo 3, which I played a decent amount back in the day, not many Halo titles have landed with me. Fell off with both Halo 4 and Halo 5, and really haven't touched any of the other titles in the series besides those three. It is fair to say that I'm not a Halo diehard, but I still do have some nostalgia for the series anyways, which is why I wanted to go back to the original game and see what made Halo Combat Evolved so great when it launched back in 2001. Playing the Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary version, thanks to the Master Chief Collection on PC, I finally jumped into the campaign for pretty much the very first time. By the time I finally wrapped up all 10 story missions, I was left having mostly enjoyed my time with Halo 1. The game certainly has aspects that have not aged well. Much of the campaign felt a little repetitive or one note. The story, dialogue, and mission structure felt like a game that was made 20 years ago, because it was a game made 20 years ago. And games have certainly come a long way since then. Some of the missions in the second half of the campaign got a little repetitive for me. I occasionally got lost as to what to do or where to go, and some of the missions made me want to throw a controller by the end of them. Specifically, the final mission, which I don't ever want to experience at any difficulty level above normal. For the love of God, please don't make me do that, because I would have a heart attack in all likelihood. The majority of my complaints are things that just haven't aged well since 2001. I don't know if I can really blame the game for them, but Halo Combat Evolved hasn't aged flawlessly. Now that I've finally witnessed the full campaign of Halo Combat Evolved, a few things stood out for me as far as what made the game memorable in the first place. A large percentage of what made Halo Combat Evolved so memorable for my revisit of the game has to be associated to the outstanding soundtrack of the game, along with simply the industry-changing multiplayer that the game had. If you ask someone about Halo, I feel like these are the two topics that will most likely come up in conversation. The multiplayer was what I specifically remember people talking about when they were discussing Halo. It is fair to say that the mode launched the series to another level. The multiplayer is likely the biggest reason for Halo being a classic, but I don't think that comes as much of a surprise to most people. Along with the multiplayer, the soundtrack for the entire Halo series is one of the consistently best music you will find in gaming. Halo Combat Evolved doesn't disappoint when it comes to the music and sound design. At this point, we also can hear various Halo tracks in our head at command at this point. The music was and still is pretty unique for a shooter. The moment that truth and reconciliation kicks in, you just get pumped up to kick some Covenant butt.
Covenant believe that what they call the silent cartographer is somewhere under the...
The music is standout, but I also found many of the sound effects for weapons and enemies to be very satisfying as well. The sound of shields recharging or of the elites barking orders still remain great today. And I won't ever forget the countdown timer just before you respawn during multiplayer matches. From the music to the sound effects, what players hear while playing Halo Combat Evolved probably plays a huge impact on the nostalgia that many have for the series. The music and the multiplayer were two parts that I expected would remain standout aspects of the game, but there were smaller design choices and details that I found to be interesting as well. With the anniversary version of Halo Combat Evolved allowing you to swap back between updated and original graphics, I found myself jumping back and forth between the two to see how areas or vistas looked from one version to another. I slowly found myself playing more and more with the original graphics than the updated look. While you can pick apart aspects of the original graphics, original art direction of the game really ended up standing out to me. The heavy use of purple and pink for Covenant locations really popped and provided a more retro and alien feel than the updated version, which sort of felt generic at this point. The ring itself looks more impressive with the original graphics, as it isn't blocked out by clouds or other objects nearly as much. It just seems a lot more vast compared to the updated look. Seeing the ring for the first time still is cool, yet it didn't really deliver the same impact today that it likely would have had back in the day. The original art and lighting also gives certain missions or areas a heavier horror vibe compared to the updated version. The second half of the campaign dips way more into the horror feel than I expected. I feel like the original look played a big influence in that feel. Playing through the campaign, I was surprised by how wide most levels ended up being. They don't have open world levels, but they're big enough that vehicles are actually needed to traverse the world. I certainly see myself being impressed by how big the Halo ring feels if I was playing a game for the first time in 2001. Not many, if any, shooters felt as expansive as Halo at the time. I can see some Half-Life influence in Halo, but I also can see that Halo's large play areas probably ended up influencing many games from that point on, as it showed that shooters don't have to take place in maze-like corridor spaces. Speaking of large areas in the game, the vehicles were one of the cool parts of Halo that I always found fun to try out. Not many games managed to provide workable vehicles, especially in multiplayer, in a game that wasn't a racing game. Halo Combat Evolved mostly achieves in including fun tools to change up the flow of the game. Screw that last Warthog mission though. I refuse to accept that control as well. I will not do that again. You can't make me do it, Master Chief. You can't. The game still controls pretty well once you up the sensitivity a bit, and sticking a plasma grenade to a grunt or a leak remains very satisfying, especially with how far the explosions end up launching everyone. I still hate the assault rifle though, but the Magnum is very much overpowered and I love it. One final facet of Halo Combat Evolved that I think ended up hooking many players into the world is the universe that Bungie created for the game and eventually the series. The game's narrative throws you in the middle of a war between humans and aliens, with a lot of terminology and details that players don't really know much of anything about. You can tell pretty quickly though that Halo has a very well thought out and deep universe. It just isn't pushed in the forefront a lot. I'm sure a good portion of players ended up getting lost in trying to explore much about the different races, factions, and history of Halo's universe, which goes to show how initially intriguing Halo Combat Evolved can be. Heading into Halo Combat Evolved for the first real time, I really just wanted to see the reasons why it became a gaming juggernaut. The series isn't at the same level it once was, but with Halo Infinite looking to recapture some of what made the series great in the first place, it seemed like a good opportunity to pick apart what made Halo great. Obviously, having multiplayer be something that players want to come back to over and over again is key, along with continuing the top-notch sound design and music. Not to mention shooting hordes of aliens needs to feel good and also be fun, especially with friends. However, what I really found out while diving into Halo Combat Evolved's campaign is that Halo grabbed many of us with its memorable universe and wonderful visuals that transported us to a setting that left us not knowing what to expect and had us wanting to explore as much as we could. I'm sure that is what many players felt in 2001, which helped the game capture the imagination of millions of fans, and it might be what Halo needs to recapture that glory in 2021. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that business, and thanks for watching.